Hello and welcome to this episode of Wise Human. Today I have with me Jake Shannon. He is an entrepreneur, a coach, a podcast host, and a lover of yoga. Welcome, Jake.
Nicole, thank you so much. I have no idea if anybody who watches this knows, but that was like fantastic. She just led me through this incredible guided breathwork meditation. So I'm doing my best to be the human caffeine that I normally am, but I'm like decaf.
Uh-oh, do we need to get up and like jump around a little bit?
No, don't worry. I'll get ramped up, but man, I feel
It'll be
very
a
chill.
slow build, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't think anybody knows about it. Only people that have been on the podcast. So yeah, maybe I'll put out a little meditation for everybody so they can
Dude,
experience it as well.
that's like the perk, man. If you have not been on our podcast, get on, man. You get a really nice meditation prior. Very good.
There we go. Yeah. Thank you. So we were talking about yoga and how yoga saved your life. Well, you mentioned yoga saved your life. So I'm curious if we could go into that. But first, why did your life need saving? What was the condition or the situation of your life prior?
So, and thank you for having me on. I'm really excited actually, because I don't really get to talk about this all that often. But yoga is magic, literally. If you get into the more deeper study of the literature and some of the stuff, there's these things called the siddhis, Sidhi, like Siddhartha, but it's siddhis. And these are the magical powers that yoga bestows upon its users. And I'll leave it to the listener to go research the siddhis on their own. But yoga is truly magic. And the way I define magic is not like Harry Potter or some X-Men Avengers superpower, but really it's like a less reliable form of science. I think of science as the most reliable forms of magic, things that definitely should be repeatable, right? That there's replication. Well, in the siddhis, there's all kinds of like mind over matter kind of things that happen to yogis. And I stumbled on yoga when I guess I was maybe in my late 20s, but I just was basically going to impress a girl. And I was like, all right, yeah, I'll go to this yoga class, whatever. And I was like, man, this is brutal. Like, because it was a typical Bikram class. This had to be in the late 90s. And I went to the class. It was great. And, I come from my athletic background is martial arts and wrestling and grappling. And so wrestlers in particular are really known for a grueling workout that very few people can do. And I was very shocked at how challenging the Bikram hot yoga was. Well, all of this is important for the buildup because for the story, because I had been injured in wrestling. I have one carotid artery left because I'd been strangled so many times consensually, but through the grappling, I'd been just choked so many times, and one of my carotid arteries collapsed, and I didn't know this actually. So I ended up having symptoms from a stroke. I was having strokes, mini strokes. I did not know the symptoms when it was happening to me. My strokes at it's called a carotid dissection. That had happened 10 years prior. The doctor, the vascular surgeon, was guessing to diagnosis in 2019. I was in England coaching a grappling. I tour, but prior to lockdowns messed everything up. But prior to lockdowns, I would go to England as a part of my seminars, and I would tour from top to tail England. And on the flight over on my 2019 tour, I flew, and I did not know this at the time, but I'm gonna be 50 this year. So I'm doing everything I can to stay in shape because I still have to be athletic. And in about 2014, I had to stop wrestling. And it was very, very challenging for me in 2014 because so much of my identity was wrapped up in wrestling. And it was weird. Like, even like in the wrestling world, if I had conflicts, like a lot of it was settled by like, well, okay, let's just wrestle. You know what I mean? But I had to not do that anymore because of my issues for my carotid. I didn't even know what was happening, but I was getting dizzy. I was losing the ability to use my right hand. My mind was fuzzy. I'd lose my vision, symptoms of a stroke, and I didn't know. So anyway, I had quit. And the only thing I remembered back to the 90s was yoga. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm gonna start getting into yoga. And it was very comparable, right? Because wrestling's done on a mat, yoga's done on a mat, right? Wrestling, you're wrestling an opponent, but yoga, I look at it like I'm wrestling myself, right? Like I'm trying to overcome, I'm coming to terms with who I am in these extreme situations of the calisthenics and the heat and whatnot. And 2009, I had been doing yoga and I actually just gotten certified. So I was really hardcore with my practice, going every day for years. And I was in great shape. And on the flight over to the UK in 2019, I did not know this. And subsequently, of course, you find things out by touching the hot stove, or at least I do, that there is a high correlation with athletes that do creatine supplementation and international flying with blood clots.
Mm.
This was prior to all this stuff going on with COVID and the vaccines and stuff. But and it was literally like 6 months prior to all of it. On my flight over, I ended up getting a massive blood clot in my right shoulder. Mm. And then again, being myself, I just was like, my arm basically swelled up. It looked, my left arm, it was ridiculous. It was so bad that I was touring, walking around London, and just some bystander looked at me and was like, oh man, you look like Popeye. I was like, oh, but that's how bad my arm, it was really ridiculous. Now, I just thought I had like an edema because I didn't have pain. I didn't lose function in the arm. And so I was there to work. And so I actually had this massive blood clot. And I continued to coach. I did 3 wrestling camps, tours, and then did a bunch of foot tours around the city of York, the city of London, like 10-mile walks everywhere. Long story short, I get back home. The swelling doesn't go down. I go to the emergency little clinic, and they look at me and they're like, holy crap, you need to get to the hospital. There's a blood clot. I'm like, oh, okay. So I go there. And then the doctors were all like, this is a miracle. How are you not dead? It's been like this for 2 weeks. And it was during this time that they diagnosed the carotid, because they were the poor girl who was helping me out was doing the ultrasound on my arm, and she starts down, and the clot was in my entire arm. It was bad, very, very bad. And because I'd waited 2 weeks to get it done. Mm-hmm. And they were like, how did you not die of like an embolism or stroke out or something? I'm like, I don't know, but this is where the yoga comes in. I firmly believe that it was the yoga, the breath work, and just the ability, the magic of me being in tune with my own body, that despite this crazy thing, I mean, I've been in medical journals because of this. They were just blown away. And when I got in and even got to the hospital, they give you a blood thinner intravenously known as heparin is the name of it. And they put it in, and they were shocked because they actually thought they were going to, and I am so glad, they thought they were going to have to basically take like a roto-rooter and go through all of my veins in my arm to clear it out. But just with the heparin, and I believe the yoga and me being in shape and having such a connection with my mind and my body, it totally fixed itself in a day. I still have the clot and I have to be on blood thinners now. But I truly attribute, one, not to stroking out, being able to work for 2 weeks, and then having almost a complete fix within a couple of days, all because of the work that I did with yoga. So in that way, I believe that yoga truly, had I not been on that hardcore regimen of going every day and being that serious, and meditating and, really being in tune. I think I very well probably would have died or been in real trouble when I landed in the UK because it was the flight there. I mean, when I woke up in the morning, my arm was like that, after getting rest, after trying to battle the jet lag or whatnot.
Mhm, mhm. So you were practicing consistently for a while at that point?
Yeah, I'd been going almost every day for about 3 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So you were fully in it. That's incredible. Why do you think that there's some purpose related to you also still being here?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. I have, one, I think that I have a particularly high or strong will, in particular, will to live. I've been very fortunate to cheat death. Like, I mean, I don't know. I'm not looking to compete with a cat, but I'm somewhere up there in the like number 7 or number 8 of like getting away with living still. So I have a very strong drive and a will. Um, as for the greater purpose, I mean, I don't know. Like sometimes I think that the mind is an interesting thing, and I try not to get like my ego involved and be like, oh yes, because I have to do. I don't know. Obviously, I think that there were things left for me to still accomplish, and maybe even to be an example to other people. Like you need to get on your mat and start practicing. I don't know. I'd like to think so.
Right. I mean, I personally think if we're here, there's still a reason we're here. Like once we go, our mission in this body for this round is done.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. 100%. I mean, I really am a bit of a yoga nerd. I really do enjoy yoga. What is interesting to me is between the relationship between yoga and wrestling is that actually the yoga exercises. And I'm trying to think of the scholar's name is David Gordon White. I don't have you ever read any of his work?
No, I'm not familiar.
Oh man, he's so good. He's an Oxford guy, but he's written a lot of really fantastic stuff on yoga and just the history of it. And one of the interesting things is that in wrestling, there are these in India, it's called Kushti wrestling. There is a very strong tradition there in wrestling, and it's to be a wrestler in India is almost like being a monk. Like it's like very very serious. Hanuman, the monkey god, is the avatar of the wrestlers, and Hanuman is an avatar of Shiva, and so like and Shiva being the Adi Yogi, the first yoga guy. But if you go back and you look at uh, the story of yoga, and the yoga of like Patanjali, it's mostly meditative. It is mostly breath work, right? Like there's something like 112 different methods that Shiva brought for us to do different kinds of breath work, like one nostril and different pacing and all these different kinds of breathing. The hatha yoga that we see today is very interesting and tied to wrestling because, and this is in a lot of David Gordon White's work, that what we practice today in like a core power or Bikram or any, whether it's a mom and pop or a big corporate thing, but the typical kind of yoga that we all love, the hot yoga in particular, the physical yoga, not just asana, but actual like the strenuous calisthenics, is a hybrid. And it's a hybrid of old Indian wrestling exercises and British calisthenics with the meditative vibe of Patanjali's sutras and ideas. And there's a whole fascinating history. Like if we look at Dandasana, the word is 2 words together. Asana, we know. A dand is a special push-up done by the Hindu wrestlers.
Hmm.
It looks like kind of a dive bomber push-up. If you type in Hindu push-up, that's what they're called. That's a dond. And the majority of the exercise is basically these free weight squats, a high number, like 500 body weight squats, and then you wrestle, plus 250 DANDs, D-A-N-Ds, with some other exercises that they've developed strictly for what are known as the Akara, which is the wrestling gym in India.
That's so interesting. I've practiced yoga for a while, but I did not realize there was any relation to wrestling. But I will say I took a martial arts class like a week ago or a month ago, and I saw a lot of similarities with yoga and qigong and tai chi. So,
Mm.
so yeah, on the same page.
Yeah, kind of a moving meditation.
Yeah, and yoga is so many pieces, right? I think in the Western world, a lot of us think of it just as the physical practice. But if you want to look at Ashtanga, the 8 limbs of yoga, that's
Right.
one small piece. And the physical practice was actually to prep the body to sit in meditation. So a lot of those, more power classes don't address the other 7 limbs of yoga.
Yeah, I mean, there's like these moral precepts, there's these spiritual precepts, and that is truer to the original intent of yoga, right? Like the original intent was largely just sitting and breathing and having different modes of focus, and then they decided to add in the more physical aspect later. And a lot of that has to do with the British colonization of India. So it became this hybrid of British calisthenics with the wrestling work and then some of the spiritual work. But it's a fantastic thing. It really is. So, sometimes I find it funny because we think that this physical practice is old, but it's only in this mode of us doing these things in a mandala or whatever, these physical postures and movements is really only a couple hundred years old.
Hmm, interesting.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. David
oh,
Gordon White he has some really fantastic stuff. There's some other guys. I don't know if I have the book here. Another book called I want to say it's either the wrestler's body or the physical body, and it's Joseph Adler. And again, it's just so apparent the connection between wrestling and yoga as well. It's
mm,
totally fascinating.
I'll have to check that out. I am curious. You mentioned that prior to having this blood clot, you would wrestle out conflicts. That was like how you did it. So what shifted? How do you resolve conflict now with those people?
I wrestle people intellectually now.
Ah, okay. Shifted it.
So I mean, that's also a function of getting older. I mean, being in this body, especially being in a male body, testosterone is interesting. And now, having been in a body for 50 years and surfed that wave of testosterone as it's gone from a tsunami to just kind of a wave pool, it's interesting to note how these different hormones have a psychedelic component, meaning like they change the way we perceive the universe, so like a lot of it's much easier now for me just to beat somebody up intellectually and to challenge them out on the mat.
Yeah. So that would have eventually shifted regardless of your physical health.
Yeah, but I have 2 young boys and they're only 11 and 13, so I still kick their ass.
Do they wrestle?
They wrestle me. They're in a
Yeah.
martial arts program. I mean, we roughhouse. I subscribe to like the doctrines of peaceful parenting, like not hitting your kids and that kind of stuff. So I'm only teasing, but we do roughhouse. Like we
Yeah.
roughhouse like
Oh,
crazy.
yeah. I took
And
it
it's
as
funny.
a playful thing.
Well, I'm one of those dads, like, man, you gonna play checkers with me, you're gonna play chess, you're gonna play Monopoly. Like, I will never let you win. You will never, ever, ever, ever get a trophy for participation out of me. Like, you have to actually beat me ever.
Mhm.
but they'll actually have real satisfaction when that day comes. And it's funny because even my 13-year-old, he's big for 13.
Mhm.
And he gives the martial arts instructor a hard time, this like 22-year-old dude, and he's like suplexing him and stuff. So, and he's only 13. It's quite fun. But that's because I don't, I make him really wrestle me, and I get him, I don't put it all the way on like I would
Mhm.
against somebody my size or bigger, but I definitely keep the pressure on him. And I just find that kind of, pressure is a privilege. I think a lot of people cop out,
Can you elaborate
and
on
yoga
that?
prepares people for that kind of pressure.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, dude, yoga sucks. It's not supposed to be awesome.
Yeah.
If it was supposed to be awesome, it'd be just sitting here talking to Cole. That would be yoga. Well, I guess you could maybe define it that way, but like the yoga that you and I are talking about, particularly these more hatha power yoga, whatever you want to call it, is challenging. And that's a good thing. That's where growth happens. You have to push yourself beyond what you think is possible so you can reach your full potential. I think yoga is a fantastic method for that.
Mhm. And like you said, in life in general, that's how we grow and evolve, is pushing our limits, putting ourselves outside of our comfort zone over and over and over again, or else we become stagnant. And that's just not a good place to be.
Well, and it's not even a choice. So I think that, like you and me are only like 2 generations removed from people shitting in an outhouse in 2-degree weather. We're only 2 generations removed from like not really having hot water for showers, you know? So we're so like, look how fast it took for us to become soft. And our body, our entire being co-evolved, co-created with this universe. And, like, sure, there's all these hippies and people in the modern age and like, oh, this is great and that's great. I'm like, yeah, okay, go do Naked and Afraid and tell me how awesome and peaceful nature is. It is constantly trying to kill you, constantly. And
Mhm.
so we've been removed from that difficulty. And I think, while we've removed ourselves, which is natural, it's common, like, yeah, man, I don't want to be feeling threatened and stressed out constantly. Like, it's a good thing. We've done good. But I think we have to understand that, we kind of create problems because of the vestiges that still remain, like for however many years. Let's say mankind has been in this form, in these bodies with this neurology for 100,000 years. Okay. I don't know. I'm just guessing, but let's say it's somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 years that we've been like this. For 99.9% of that, things have been trying to kill us, and we've been cold and like literally living meal to meal, hunting and
Survival.
picking berries. And it's only been in the last like 150 years where we've just been chilling out and getting fat and all this other stuff. And so we have so much comfort, but I think we still have this vestigial, this like legacy built into the mental software of paranoia. And then we end up creating all this. And then everybody gets all butthurt over politics and paranoid about things that don't even exist. It's just irony. But I think, again, yoga could solve this, in particular the meditative part of it. Well, if we would start actually become familiar with that monkey mind, that part of us that we think is us, but is not actually us.
Mhm.
The people who smoke cigarettes and say, I want to quit. And it's like, well, you're the one driving to the gas station, getting out your wallet, asking for the cigs, unwrapping the cellophane, pulling it out, lighting a cigarette, the lighter, drawing on it. At what point are you going to quit, man? Who are you listening to? It's all in the same brain, right? There's this bifurcation. There's the part of the mind that does and the part of the mind that observes. And I think yoga helps us integrate those, particularly the meditative part. But I do think that like the challenging parts that we're speaking of, being in yoga in a really messed up super awkward, unbalanced position, sweating your ass off, and your body's trembling, and you start realizing this connection, like, oh yeah, I have part of me telling me to quit or put my foot down, or, and then I have this other part that's aware of that and can say no,
Hmm. Yeah.
in an
True.
attempt to integrate.
Hmm. Yeah. 100%. And I think that sometimes we do take the easy way and we don't allow ourselves to push, and then what? Then how do we evolve? How do we continue to grow? What happens at that point? What would you recommend for people that are feeling a little bit stuck and, you know, not wanting to push themselves, but knowing that they should?
Well, I mean, comfort is a hell of a drug, so I think the first thing is, just like an addict, you have to recognize that you got a problem. And, I think you have to kind of have that come to Jesus moment, or that man in the mirror, or whatever, rock bottom, whatever you want to call it. I just, I don't, I'm not a big fan of like pretentious jargon and stuff. Like, I just call it, allow yourself to be freaking disgusted with yourself.
Mm,
I mean, I'm being real. Like, some of the biggest change in my life was preceded by me being completely freaking grossed out by where I had let myself be. Whether it was out of shape, whether it was not having enough money, whether it was, what, I mean, just getting, you are allowed to say it's not okay. You're allowed to have higher standards. Not everything has to be accepting and okay and cool. Like, this is where I think that things like sports and athletics are important. And I get so annoyed with this participation trophy stuff. It's not because I'm mean. It's not because I'm a Republican. None of the stupid tropes and bromides. It's because we have to have challenges and we have to push ourselves. And we've already allowed ourselves to be so gosh darn comfortable. It's actually a detriment. It's a real problem. We need to control. So now I find, like, I think it's great. I see people taking ice baths. I love that. That's fit. That is what. So, the average 20, I don't know the numbers, people can Google this, but this is get you the gist. The average like 25-year-old has less testosterone today. The average 25-year-old has less testosterone than the average 60-year-old from 30 years ago.
wow.
And things like ice baths spikes your testosterone, because I think it creates that challenge, that physical, maybe it's pain, yeah, but not injury. I don't think
Discomfort.
there's a difference between pain and injury. And
Hmm.
people, I love to see like all the Wim Hof stuff. I think that's great. We had talked, I have switched from yoga mostly because I really enjoyed going to Core Power, which shocked me because they really seemed to be able to create a cool vibe, even though they were a big corporation. Right now, maybe, I don't know what that's like outside the state. It started here in Colorado, so maybe that, I don't know. That was my experience, and I enjoyed it. But when all the lockdown and then all the vaccination stuff came on, they're like, you've got to be vaccinated. You got to do this. You got to wear a mask. I'm like, man, your values are not aligned with mine as a company. And I'm just not a person to like get politicians or attorneys involved. I just vote with my dollars. So I'm like, you guys lost me forever. I'll see you. And, because of what happened during lockdowns, I've adjusted. I'm like, well, man, bureaucrats could just ruin everybody's lives like at the drop of a hat. I mean, we're finding that Fauci was totally wrong, that he probably lied, that all these problems, right? Like, he's had this track record. He did the same thing with AIDS, with AZT back in the 80s, totally messed it up and still got away with it. But I did find I had to adapt because I was like, man, I'm not going to do that, get that invested in something as important as this process. So, I don't know that it's necessarily yoga. I love yoga because I do love the spiritual aspect, makes you a little more philosophical about physical exercise. And I think that's actually super important. But I ended up switching. There's this great company. I don't own any stock or anything. I mean, it's called Hotworks. And I mean, I have really enjoyed that. They offer these little yoga classes, but they're not a class. It's like you go into these like infrared saunas, has like normal heat and then infrared heat. And then they have like a screen with a virtual instructor. And they have different classes like yoga and isometrics or Pilates or whatever. And then you could also do, but what I like about it, in addition to the isometrics, is I could get in, and this goes back to my old wrestling days. I can go in and get on an elliptical bike. I can get on a cycle. I can do rowing at 130 degrees. And it's that same challenge. Now, what that is called, that I think we've removed from ourselves, is it's called hormesis, HORMESIS. It's the same principle that causes muscle growth, right? You go work out real hard, you're sore, it's because you've destroyed the muscles. And when it grows back stronger. You break a bone, it grows back twice as strong. That's called hormesis. But we've removed any of that roughness, that stimulus that makes us stronger. So we're just pudgy and weak, those of us that aren't doing anything to really push ourselves and put ourselves in discomfort.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, let's move on to a different question though, because I feel like we could talk about that for a while. But I'm curious about your entrepreneur lifestyle and where that started. What inspired you on that path? Have you always been an entrepreneur, or did it start later in life?
Yeah, I grew up blue collar, and you know what? I'm 50, so my parents are like 80 now. So they're old school, that like, you got to get a job, got to go to college. So they definitely put me on that trajectory. I was the first in my family to go to college. And then I was the first to get my graduate degree. And I got these great jobs, like I wasn't even 30 and I was making $150,000 a year, living kind of a Wolf of Wall Street lifestyle in Southern California. And it was fantastic. But I also felt like a little bit of my soul was dying every time I went into that freaking office or I went into a cubicle or whatever. I was not connected. I was definitely not engaged. I didn't really enjoy the work. I enjoyed the money, but I was like, man, I don't know, man, this ain't that awesome. So I felt like I was kind of sold a bill of goods, and I was like, man, this is just empty. And I've done everything right, and I've always enjoyed rap music. Maybe that's one of the things that I have in common with Grant, is like, I'm an old white dude that just loves all this like hip hop culture stuff and the attitude and stuff. But I remember there was and Dr. Dre's album, I think it's called 2001 is the album, and it came out in like 2000. And on it, there was some diss trackers. He was pissed off at somebody and he's rapping about it, rhyming about it. And on it, he says something about like somebody was dogging him. And then he said, oh yeah, well, that's great. But basically it was like, why don't you move some units first and then let's talk. And for whatever reason, I mean, my master's degree is in financial math, and maybe because I just was in a very quantitative state there. And it wasn't complicated math that I had to make this jump. I mean, I was doing crazy math in grad school, like stochastic calculus and statistics and things of that nature. But when he said moved units, it really made me think. And I'm like, what is he talking about? Oh, he's talking about back then CDs, right? Sell CDs. And I'm like, oh, well, okay, move units. So one unit cost me, let's say I paid $16 back in the year 2000 for this album. So if I sold 1 million of these, I would make $16 million. And then a light went off. And I was like, man, I am right now stuck at a desk for 12 to 14 hours because I was working in investment banking, which is very, very, the culture is just kind of like that. They expect you to work ridiculous amount of hours. You make a ridiculous amount of money, but it's like, that's all you do. And then you go party hard and drink and do whatever. So I was like, huh. And it just got me started thinking differently about, man, I need to stop selling my time and start selling a product, because now I'll be free. And so I fooled around with a bunch of things. At the time I was in grad school in San Francisco, and Have you ever lived up in the Bay Area?
I haven't, only visited.
All right. So I was in my late 20s, very heterosexual dude in San Francisco. And, San Francisco's got a lot of gay people, right? Gay dudes. And they were all ripped. And I was in like kind of doing wrestling, and I dabbled even in pro wrestling. And I was always kind of lanky, so I had to get ripped. So I was trying to figure this out. And so for a short period of time, I started doing steroids. Like we're talking around around the same time I was listening to Dr. Dre. And I did some, and I got pretty big. I even had some modest success. I toured the United States as a pro wrestler, had a tryout with the WWE. So I had some success with it. But because of that, I was doing this, and then I was listening to that. And then I was like, I know all these gay guys want steroids. I didn't sell the drugs because I wasn't that, I'm risk averse. So I didn't want to go to jail. So I'm like, why don't I put together a directory of all the mail order places in Canada and Mexico where it's legal and they can mail it here? And I sold it on the back page of the San Francisco Weekly, this directory. And I just went and bought myself a postal mailbox, put it on there, made a list, and just photocopied it and stapled it. Sold it for $50. And I started making money. Not a lot of money, but enough to where I was like, shoot, I am moving units. This is so easy. Oh my gosh. So from there, I kind of was like, yeah, I'm not going to, this steroid thing, this is a little too much of a gray area. I don't want to get too deep on it, right? So, but I was very obsessed with wrestling and working out. So I started dabbling. I was coding at the time. I dabbled with making a software. I called it Fitnomics, like economics and fitness, Fitnomics. And it would do all this stuff that a typical app does now, where it would, you type in your weight, your height, you get a caliper and pinch your fat, and it could tell you all your body weight and all that kind of stuff and your body composition. That didn't go too far. I sold a couple units of that. And then I was like, I had a flash. And when I coach people getting into entrepreneurship, I still use this method, and it really works great for helping people figure out like what would be a great side hustle to start. Because, I think anybody who's ever had a sales job knows that if you're selling something that you don't believe in, you're not going to succeed. It's very hard to sell something you don't believe in. So, and you have to, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to sell as well as do, product development and operations and marketing and all that. You have to sell. So what I did is I was spending so much money on wrestling, from going to training camps to flying to instructionals and books and everything. And at first I was like, you know what, I'm going to incorporate, and then I can just write all this off. And even if I don't make revenues for a couple of years, at least I could take the write off. Well, because I was such a consumer of this product, I was actually an expert. And so I started figuring out, I was already incorporated. I'm like, well, how can I start putting together a product, not unlike that directory of pharmacists that sell performance enhancing drugs. I started thinking like, what could I start doing this with wrestlers? So I actually went, and there's something in copyright law known as public domain. And so like Disney keeps popping out of public domain, like Winnie the Pooh, just after like 100 years, I can't remember because they keep changing the laws, but after like 100 years of something being created, the author loses the copyright. And anybody can use it. So there's been recently a horror film with Winnie the Pooh, because like the main people who had it lost the copyright, and anybody could do anything with it, right? Well, I went back and I found all these old wrestling instructional books from the 1800s. And they had passed out of copyright. And so I was like, I had already made this listing, this like book thing. Why don't I and I seriously sat down with these old books. I bought them and scanned them. I scanned like 10,000 pages. That's how crazy I am. Just like over and over and over, put it together, started selling it, and it took off. It took off. We were talking about the influence of Hindu wrestlers and just Hindu physical culture. Another thing people don't realize, like that a lot of what we do in yoga today is derivative of the Hindu wrestlers. Well, if people do pole fitness or ever go to a strip club, what they may not know is that pole dancing originally comes from Hindu physical culture, in particular the wrestlers. They used to have a wooden pole, not steel, but a wooden pole. And you can Google this. It's very interesting to see. It's called Mala Kam, Malakham, and it's basically pole dancing, but it was
Wow.
done by men, wrestlers. So they're like in a little tunic, but flipping around doing crazy stuff. Anyway, one of the things that the wrestlers used, you know what a kettlebell in fitness, like it looks like a bowling ball with a curved handle.
Yep.
In about 2004, 2005, this was like the trendiest thing in all of fitness. Everybody, it was like, oh, kettlebell this, kettlebell that. It was like thousands of dollars to get certified. It was a big trend and there's a lot of money to be made. But I never jump on a bandwagon. I always try to be number one. I try to be first because it gives me a huge advantage if you're the first to the market. And so because I was so deeply steeped already in some of this information, I knew that they had this thing. It's a mace. It looks like a kettlebell. It's a ball, but instead of the looped handle, it's a long broomstick, and they swing it. And now, like Joe Rogan's company On It sells one, and all these different. Well, I was the one who created that. I brought it to the West. I made the first production. It's called a gata or a mace. And so I actually ended up another entrepreneurial venture. I started this wrestling company. Then I started this mace belt thing, which took off. I even, Jason Statham bought one from me. It's huge. If you type in mace bell, or steel mace is another name for it, it's like millions and millions of videos on YouTube and whatever. I mean, I created like these whole industries just because I was pursuing things that I loved, because I knew I could sell it, because I was passionate for it.
So it's about finding something that you love
That's
and
easy. That's what I
that
recommend.
benefits others, right?
Yeah. So like, let's just role play. Like if you were a client of mine and, you were like, yeah, I'm trying to figure out how I can make a lot of money or have a big impact on the world or something, I would be like, well, the low hanging fruit, what I tell people first is I go, okay, go get your bank statement, go get your credit cards and get like the last year and go through it. And I want you to black out all the stuff that's necessities like food, clothes, utilities, rent, blah, blah, blah. Black all that out. Then I want you to put into groups. What's left? What are you buying? Are you buying makeup? Are you buying car parts? Are you buying whatever it is? In your case, I would guess maybe you're buying a lot about yoga or personal development. I would say you probably would be best off going into that space because you're already an expert, because you're an expert consumer. It's what you buy a lot of. That's
Mhm.
where you're going to be creative, because you're an expert consumer. You're going to see gaps in the market that are not being served. And that's where you go.
Yeah, that's yeah. You're good at predicting because yes, personal growth is like the number one thing. Podcasting gear as well. But yeah. So how do you work with clients? You do one-on-one with clients? Do you have employees that work for you, or is it always you that's working with clients?
Well, so I really have three companies that I focus on. I have my wrestling company, which, you're talking like your purpose. I probably think that makes the least amount of money, but that's like probably my like life's purpose, given the amount of impact. I mean, I've been mentioned on Joe Rogan a couple times for that. And it's just a weird thing, man. I don't even understand it, but it's just so deeply ingrained with my life. And it's like, I can't even leave it. Like it's so entrenched. It's crazy. But the other one I have is my wife and I run a software company. Now that's more of her baby. She's passionate about that, but I'm very good on business development. So I've helped her over the last, 18 years that we've been married with that. And then my third business is this number one coaching, which is really about business development coaching, like what I've done for my wife and I've done for other clients and other entrepreneurial ventures and whatnot. I will take individuals, but that's very much on a case by case basis. I really have to see that this person is serious, and by serious I mean crazy. Like you have like they have opposite meanings, but to me it's the same thing, because the amount of effort it takes to be a successful entrepreneur, over 90% of small businesses fail in the first 10 years. Like, meaning there's very few people that succeed at this, and it takes a very specific type of personality. Doesn't have to be brash or crazy like me, or an aggressive person, but it takes a persistent person, and it takes a creative person, and it takes an optimist. If you're not an optimist, you won't make it, period. You got to go. And that can be changed. If you're a pessimist, you can do the work internally through meditation, through whatever, personal development, to become an optimist, but you have to have a positive outlook. You have to think things are going to be okay, because whatever you put your attention on is what you're going to get more of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like magic. You know what I mean? That's like, that's just a part of how consciousness works and engages with the universe. And don't ask me to explain it. It's like, don't ask me to explain how electricity works, but I can flip the light switch on and off. I can do that. It works.
Mm-hmm. So optimism, number one thing, if you want to be
Optimism,
entrepreneur.
persistence, and creativity. Now,
And
some of that you can hack into. Persistence is just grind. You have to just be okay with repetition and insane amounts of effort. And that can be built up, just like running a marathon. It's the same. A marathon is a perfect metaphor for that, because it's insane. And you don't start running 26 miles. You start with like a mile, maybe.
Yeah, one step at a time. Couch to
you
marathon.
develop. Yeah, you develop. So that the creativity can be hacked into. That discipline, that persistence has to just be grown. Anybody can do that.
Mm-hmm.
The creativity can be hacked into, and that's usually by putting yourself in a like burning the bridges, like commitment, like spend $100,000, like where you're committed, like you have to do this.
Force yourself. There's no other option.
Yeah, you're
There's
stuck.
no plan B.
Nope. It's like the plane's going down. You got to jump. Like you don't think about it then.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if I'm at the high dive, the little kid's all like, and cries and goes back down the ladder instead of jumping off. If that kid was being chased by the monster of their nightmares, they would freaking jump. But that's what I'm talking about. Like you have to, that can be hacked, right? So the creativity, the persistence can be hacked. And what was the last one? I can't remember.
Optimism.
Oh, optimism. That one I think is actually the hardest, and it can be developed just like the persistence. But man, so many people don't know how to do the work to control their mind. That's just they're.
What would you recommend for somebody that is a chronic pessimist and wants to shift to a more optimistic mindset?
Like honestly, I felt a really nice kinship with you when we met at GrowthCon. And then when we opened up with that nice breathwork meditation, I am a firm believer in meditation, and in particular breath work. So what's interesting about this, like kind of just cosmically, is that when I was about 19 years old, I had I don't know what else to call it. I hate to use these words because I'm not a fan of psychology or psychiatry. If you do, like I was mentioning, like science is this thing that has to be replicable. Well, there's something known as a replication crisis in science right now. Most people don't know this. This is why all this trust the science stuff. I'm like, yeah, I'm a statistician. I'm gonna argue with you on that. I don't care if you're an MD. I'm gonna point some stuff out that you probably don't know. There's a great statistician and epidemiologist out of Stanford named John Ioannidis. And he did this great study on now most people don't know statistics, so they don't understand, but it has to do with R squared and statistical significance and this idea of statistical power. Okay, these are all technical terms. People can look them up if they're interested. And John Ioannidis, Ioannidis, I think he's a Stanford epidemiologist, a statistician. Most of the studies in academic journals, in particular psychology, cannot be replicated. They're full of it. It's nonsense. It's all BS. And I think that's a lot of like us trapping ourselves in our own ego, right? Like true science, I would imagine like a telescope or a microscope, right? But studying the brain is like bending the telescope to look at the thing looking through the telescope, right? It's like using your own mind to analyze your mind. There's this inherent loop that causes distortion. This is what causes fractals and feedback. And consciousness is this self-reflection, right? Like standing between two mirrors at a stylist or at a barber. It creates this illusion of grandeur and depth and whatnot, but it's all an illusion. It just doesn't even exist. It's just a visual illusion. Well, I think consciousness gets people in a trap that way. And I think that the path to it is kind of what we touched on earlier. And that is like this understanding between the mind that acts and the mind that observes, or the mind that talks and the mind that listens. And most people don't understand that there's this bifurcation in consciousness that way. And they sometimes think all of it is them. And it's not. And that is the challenge. So many people are just trapped in their own thoughts, and they get in these loops of pessimism. And it doesn't help that the news, it's all bad news. Like there's no good news on the news, and that's an illusion. Like they should call it the bad news instead of just the news, because it's nonsense. And in fact, like, you know, my poor mom, she's like 80 years old, and she's, oh, did you hear about this person died and this and that? And I'm like, you know what? I know this stuff happens, and I am sorry, but I did not actually know these people. It has no connection and bearing on me, and it's merely a distraction from me trying to improve the world and trying to help people. You know what I mean? So I know there's bad stuff, but I don't even want to know about it because I'm so engaged trying to improve the lot of every man, woman, and child on this planet. You know? So I do think when I was 20, I had, like, for lack of a better term, I think they call it like a schizophrenic episode, which is very prevalent in people that are 19. What they do, unfortunately, is they medicalize it instead of understanding it for what I believe it truly is. And I think there's substantial research to back this, and why I think it happens to people at this age is stress. It's a response to enormous amounts of stress. Julian Jaynes, it was a Harvard, I think he was Harvard. Maybe he's Princeton. A Princeton psychologist wrote a book on the origins of consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind. Bicameral mind is what I'm talking about the listener and the talker in the mind. And I believe, I mean, it's beyond belief. It's how I healed myself. And I'm fortunate I came up before all this medicalization and people just trying to throw a pill at solving problems instead of actually solving them, instead of taking drugs and numbing out. And I don't care if it's an opioid, an antidepressant, or it's weed or mushrooms. They all are not helping you solve the problem. They're helping numb the pain. That can be useful at times, but you do have to eventually solve the problem, or it never goes away. In fact, it probably gets worse. It festers. And I remember I was having a real struggle when I was 19. I was freaking out. I was super stressed. I'm like, dude, none of this schooling is preparing me for the world. I still don't know how to do taxes. I still don't know how to get a job. I still don't know how to make money. I still don't know how to maintain a relationship with a significant. I'm not learning anything practical. I learn all this dumb stuff. Oh, you'll never need a calculator. You're not going to carry a calculator in your pocket. You need to know the times table. I'm like, dude, I got all the world's information in my hands. But when I was coming up, they're just pushing this crap on you. And I was stressed, and I was having a challenge, and I went to a counselor, and I'm like, well, this is crap. I'm no better for going to this. Like, I've always been very results oriented. And I was like, this ain't doing it. And I happened to be reading the beat poets like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and all those guys at the time. And Kerouac was very deep into Zen. And my sociology professor, I kind of struck up a conversation with him, and he was a Zen nerd. And I was like, oh, cool. And I was already into martial arts. So I knew that there was this connection with samurais and shit. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to figure out Zen. At the University of Colorado, we chartered the CU, University of Colorado, CU Zen Society. And it needed a student on the charter, a faculty member, and then a religious person. And my sociology professor, his name's Len John Pinto, he's passed away. But he knew a Buddhist monk named Koyo from Mount Baldy in California. He'd been at the monastery for years. So the three of us chartered this, and it's still going to this day. We did this in like 92, and it's still going to this day, which blows my mind. In that practice, it was very, every young person needs to do this in my mind. I don't want to force it, but it's so valuable. I sat with this Zen master, and it was in the Rinzai tradition, which is actually the samurai tradition. There's like Soto and Rinzai. Soto is like the farmer, and then Rinzai was like the samurai. And all you do is you sit on a zafutan, on a pillow, with your legs crossed, your hands in your lap, just like what you ran me through. The only difference is you keep your eyes open in a soft gaze, and you sit there and you listen to your breathing for like a half hour or an hour, depending on the meditation. And that's it. And it was so fascinating because that sounds simple, but it's one of the most challenging things you can do, because as you sit there, you get about 6 breaths in, and all of a sudden your monkey mind's like, did I turn the burner off? Oh, what about this fight with this person? Oh, I got homework. Oh, I got my job. Oh, and then you're like, oh shit, I need to be breathing. And what ended up happening is it gave me control of my mind. That the mind is just a muscle like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you can develop this through various methods of meditation and breath work. So to me, I truly believe that single-minded focus sustained over a long period of time is magic. This is what all magical, amazing things that happen in the world are a result of sustained, like meaning over a long period of time, single-minded focus. That is how you can become an optimist, because you get control of your mind.
Thank you so much for being here today and sharing your wisdom and experience with us. I have a few final questions. First, how can people get in touch with you, follow you? What are your links? I'll link them in the bio.
Okay. And see, I told you the decaf would wear off. That meditation is very nice, but I
Didn't
got
last long.
I got a lot of fire in here, man. I'm telling you.
That's good. That's good. You're passionate.
I'm very passionate, but I appreciate you listening. I think the best way, it depends on for what. If they are resonating at all with anything on the wrestling and the physical culture stuff, my company is Scientific Wrestling, so it's just scientificwrestling.com. If you're interested in the business development and some of the sales and marketing training and how to scale a company, which is why I was at 10X GrowthCon, it's this number one coaching, like this NO1 and then coaching. And the whole idea is I'm trying to be clever. It's like from no one to number one.
That's very
that's
clever.
probably the best
I really like your marketing there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And thank you so much. I really, like I said, meeting you at GrowthCon, I could tell that you're a very, very powerful person. And I really appreciate the invitation to come and speak to you and to your audience.
Thank you. I appreciate that reflection and you taking the time. Couple more questions for you before we're done.
Of course, I got all night. I'm good.
Oh yeah. Oh, let's just go. Let's film a second episode. What is your current life mantra or motto?
That's a good one. That's a good one. I've had so many. I think, so part of the reason I was so stressed out as a teenager, in addition to the normal teen angst that we all face in transitioning from being dependent to being independent. When I was 15, I had cancer. I had Hodgkin lymphoma. And so I had to go through, 8 weeks of radiation, followed by 6 months of chemotherapy. I had about 4 or 5 pretty awful surgeries. And that was a very rough period of my life. I went from, when I was 15, I just got my black belt, great shape. I was like 6'1" and 160 pounds, a young man. I was 15. But within like 3 months, I went from 160 pounds at 6'1" to down to 117. So, I mean, I looked like I was straight out of Auschwitz or something. I mean, I was just emaciated, looking like death. And the mantra that got me through that period was, and I'm not religious, and I wasn't even then. I was actually, I'm no longer an atheist, but at that time I was an atheist. But the phrase that got me through was, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. So, I always think in terms of that, bad times don't last, but good times don't last either. And then
Truth.
the other one I think that has really served me maybe the longest in the most situations is a rhyme, and it's attributed to President Calvin Coolidge. I don't know. I don't really know much about the guy. I don't care about it, but I like the phrase, and it's persistence prevails where all else fails.
If you could tell everybody in this world one thing and they would receive it fully and understand, what would that be?
Uh, Fight for what you want. Don't ever give up. Don't ever give up.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you. And thank you for that amazing meditation. I'm still jamming.
You are so welcome anytime.